and that, quote, the soul is real, end quote.
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting conscientious emergence. Alright, today I've got a violet blue, a light purplish pink, a pale blue, and a white mixed up. And I'm just going to go start dotting and patterning the patterns that are already there with a smaller, more intricate version of a similar pattern. So here we go.
Religious left. My father, Presbyterian minister, was very close to the Catholic worker, and Daniel and Phil Berrigan ran conservative clergy and laity against the war during the Vietnam anti-war protests. He was involved in the civil rights movement. And I think it's different, perhaps, in many ways from the secular left, with maybe the exception of Camus, who considered himself an atheist. And it is that to battle malignant forces, or, if we're going to use the Kantian term radical evil, is what we are called to do in life, with the very real understanding that one, life itself is brief, relatively. I mean, I'm 68, it went pretty fast. And that evil will exist long after we're here. In the Christian paradigm, it's called bearing the cross. And I think in Barrow's biography of King, which is called Bearing the Cross, King, of course, had a doctorate in theology from Boston University. He does a very good job of explaining that orientation that King had, and that you don't measure life by empirically what you achieve. I wrote a column about the great radical feminist and socialist Lee Lakeman, who we lost a few weeks ago, and I called her in hospice. It's called Lee Lakeman, The Whoredom of the Left. And she said, everything you and I have fought for in life is worse. But that doesn't invalidate what we stood for and what we did. There's I thought quite a thoughtful book by a criminologist called Why We Kill, and he does a study of people who have committed acts of extreme violence and murder, and he talks about phantoms, that most of these people, of course, grew up in households where violence was endemic, and that these phantoms, essentially figures, even after they were gone, determined largely how they responded to people and to stimuli around them. But I think there are also phantoms that keep us, that we can't betray. My father would be one, but phantoms where we see people who have stood up to do what is right, and that they've paid a heavy cost for it, and our fealty and loyalty is to that stance regardless of the consequences. I actually think it's a better way to respond to the forces of radical evil, because it insulates you from the highs and lows which are endemic within consumer society. And so who are the great writers on that? Daniel Berrigan, without question, who baptized my youngest daughter. The Great Radical Priest, No Bars for Manhood is a great book, or Thomas Merton would be another one, or that Garrow book. And so, yeah, things are worse than they were. And most of what I've spent my life fighting for, we can talk about Gaza, are worse. And I don't see that they're going to get better. I don't see any outside impediment to stop Israel from its punishing and inhuman treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza, who don't have clean water, they don't have medicine, they don't have shelter. They are orchestrating a catastrophic humanitarian disaster on purpose, and neither forces in Europe or certainly the Trump administration has any intent to stop them. But that doesn't invalidate, the fight on behalf for Palestinian justice. I spent 14 years decrying the persecution of Julian Assange, and to be honest, I didn't think he would get out. But it didn't, we were relentless, and it was really because of the mass movements in Australia that put pressure on the Australian government that finally did free him, and thank God he is free, and he is in Australia. But I never let that, bleak view of, or my bleak view inhibit the constant campaign on my part to do everything possible to publicize his crucifixion, and including on my own money, flew to London to cover his court cases. And there finally after 14 years he's free, thank God. So, but he wouldn't be free if there weren't all sorts of people who pushed him. I mean, it wasn't the benevolence of the Biden or any other administration. It was this constant worldwide pressure against, I would argue, probably the greatest journalist of our generation. TXM, it appears that many in the mainstream left are appalled at Trump's handling of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. They paint Putin as a man who wants to invade all of Europe and therefore must be stopped by the US. What are they getting wrong? And do you think Trump may have walked us back a few inches from a nuclear conflict with Russia? Well, I've never understood the left's embrace of the war with Russia and Ukraine, or embrace of Ukraine. And maybe that's because it was in Eastern Europe and Central Europe and when the Berlin Wall came down, so I was acutely aware of the promises that have been made to Mikhail Gorbachev, that because they couldn't reunify Germany unless there was acquiescence from the Soviet Union. And the promises were explicit from Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the then German foreign minister, and James Baker, the Secretary of State, that NATO would not be expanded beyond the borders of unified Germany. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union and this fantasy on the part of American imperialists that we now had a unipolar world, in essence the United States could do whatever it wanted, coupled with the fact that the big arms manufacturers could make billions, have made billions, reconfiguring the military in the old Warsaw Pact to make their militaries compatible with NATO, we violated all of those promises. And the Ukraine was always the red line. And people, the historical trauma that the Russian people have felt is real. They were invaded largely through the Ukraine 3 different times, first of course by Napoleon, but then in the First and the Second World War. There's a WikiLeaks leaked a memo that was written by William Burns, who was then ambassador U.S. ambassador in Moscow, later became the head of the CIA, who said across the political spectrum there's no division, I'm paraphrasing, left or right, that incorporating NATO or incorporating Ukraine into NATO is something that all Russians find unpalatable. And think about it. We're kind of baiting China, but think about if Chinese warships were going up and down along the California coast, or if in the old Soviet Union, Mexico became part of the Warsaw Pact, how we would react. Now that doesn't excuse the invasion, which was a war crime. I was working at RT at the time and I denounced it as a war crime. On the other hand, it was a completely preventable war. The persecution of the ethnic Russians in Ukraine was real. The ascendancy of fascist Bandera-loving Ukrainians is real, despite the fact that Zelensky is, of course, Jewish. It was a war that never needed to have happened. Putin took the bait. But very early on in the war, Henry Kissinger, of all people, who of course I loathe, correctly said that the war has to be stopped. There has to be an exchange of land for peace. Otherwise, we are flirting with a nuclear disaster. And so I do support the Trump efforts to end the conflict, although I watched the clip of Trump and Vance with Zelensky, and I felt it was appalling. I mean, they were thugs. I think that the motivation of the Trump administration to end the war is because they admire Putin and the autocratic system he's set up. It's one they want to set up. I don't see, I mean, many say that, or, you know, I think the argument is that he's taken on the deep state, and that's another discussion, and I've written about it. And I think that's a big mistake. And there's a column, I forget the name of it, it's called something like The Deep State and the Road to Fascism, or something like that, Road to Dictatorship, but it's on the Substack. So I won't go into all of that argument now. But all totalitarian systems seek to disembowel the previous bureaucratic structure. And it's not that they are essentially freeing us from the excesses or even criminality of the FBI or anyone else. It's that they're making sure that the goons that are there are personally loyal to them. And that was true, I mean, that's what the fascists did in Germany. It's what the Bolsheviks did in the aftermath of the revolution in Tsarist Russia. It's what the Iranians did as soon as they overthrew the Shah. That's classic. And that's what's happening. So yeah, I don't understand I find the response by many in the left, including people I admire and like, just extremely naive. Where we're headed, and I'm no friend of the deep state, of course. And many of the critiques of the deep state I share. But these mechanisms of internal control are now being handed over, let's say in the FBI, to people whose complete and utter loyalty is to the figure of Trump, of this, you know, the demagogue. There, you know, what little separation of powers there were, just like the social services. I mean, Head Start has been eviscerated. You know, all of the programs that we have, which are very minimal compared to what most industrial nations have, those are being destroyed. The Consumer Protection Agency, EPA, and everything else. So I'm a little stunned at how the left has responded. This is Reverend Edmund Bolea. Chris, why do you see so many liberals experiencing schadenfreude over a Trump victory? Also, how can we break through this and revive a class-based economic activism? Well, that's it. And I mean, I was just out in Seattle with Shama Sawant, and you can watch that talk and watch Shama's talk. Shama's great. We'll post her talk on Substack. And I think we got diverted with the boutique activism of woke politics and virtue signaling, and forgot that this is about class warfare. As Ralph Nader frequently said to me, we got to stop asking people whether they voted for Trump or not. We got to organize unions to fight Walmart. And it doesn't matter whether they voted for Trump, or they didn't vote for Trump, or they didn't vote. Because once you engage in that confrontation with the real centers of power, that's an education of itself. And the viciousness of those centers of power is an education of itself. So you begin to understand where real power lies. So yeah, and Shama's attempting to build militant unions and eventually, hopefully, third party built out of labor. And that's been the problem with the Green Party and other third parties, that they've been divorced from labor. And that's just going nowhere. Any successful third party movement has to be rooted in labor, because the only weapon we have, or the only strength we have, are our numbers, and the only weapon we have is the strike. And of course, they just had a nationwide strike in Greece, as Sophia just told me. That's exactly, and that is exactly how to hold power accountable, or even hold power hostage. Mutualist, have you read or have any opinions on either Benjamin Tucker or Proudhon? I've read Proudhon. but I don't know that I mean, I read Proudhon a long time ago, so I don't know that I'm gonna start a lecture on Proudhon. I'd have to go back and check my underlinings and notes. Walkman, what YouTube channels are good to stay tuned to? Do you think YouTube will continue to be a good source of information in the coming years? Well, somebody gets demonetized on YouTube, I'm worried. I think there are good programs on, good commentaries on YouTube. The Gray Zone does good stuff. Amy on Democracy Now! Can do good stuff. I mean, all of these are available on YouTube. You can get David Harvey, if you want to get good, solid, serious lectures on Marx, that's where you go. So yeah, there is good stuff on there. But we know from shadow banning and the algorithms that, should at any point we become seen as a kind of serious threat, we can instantly be shut down, because these are not public entities. They're held by private corporations that have very deep ties and links to the national security state. Kevin Katwas, are you concerned about the tech oligarchs' vision of the future? They openly espouse a pseudo-religious faith in transhumanism, a belief that we can create an AI god and merge with it, transcending our humanity, becoming gods ourselves. It sounds insane, but these people openly discuss this and hold immense power and wealth. Is this a false religion? Well, yes, it's definitely a false religion. I am deeply concerned about the power and misuse of AI, and this whole fantasy of transhumanism, which I don't think is ever attainable. So yeah, all of those are really frightening. So this is athletically smart. Norman Finkelstein recently argued that Trump doesn't need fascism like the Nazis because he has no real opposition. He has a majority in Congress and controls the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts? He does have an opposition within the deep or bureaucratic state, and that's why he's purging it. So if you look at the early years of both the Bolsheviks and the fascists in Germany, it took them several years to consolidate power because they had to dismantle bureaucratic structures that were not loyal to the party. And there were a lot of court battles, which in the beginning the Nazis lost. There was hostile press in both early Nazi Germany as well as in the early years of the Bolshevik seizure of power, but gradually they were dismantled and destroyed. And I think that's the process that we're watching. So endemic within the bureaucratic structures, there are forces that seek or would like to obstruct the unilateral or dictatorial power that Trump and those around him are trying to achieve. And that's why we're seeing the assault on the deep state. And the replacement, well, there's two things going on. They're harvesting, they're firing lots and lots of people. That's, of course, about privatization. There's 1 million civilian employees and working for the Pentagon. They would like to, I think they got rid of 5,000 of them, but they would like to get rid of most of them, and then you contract out, because that's how these corporations make money. I mean, it's interesting if you read Karl Marx that he talks about the late stage of capitalism, where unregulated predatory capitalism, disembowels the country and finally cannibalizes the very structures that permit capitalism to exist. And that, I think, is a good analogy for what is happening. This is Arman. It seems that there has been an assumption for many in independent media that because Trump and Musk are dismantling many of the tools of the deep state, that they are actually crippling U.S. empire and inhibiting capital's ability to wage war. It seems more like they plan to further centralize and privatize these powers based on the military contractors within the Trump administration. What are your thoughts on this take that Trump is actually destroying the grip that intelligence agencies and Wall Street have on foreign policy? So late empire, any empire, is you see these, I mean the Roman Empire would be an example, but you see these buffoonish figures, or the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it doesn't really matter, and they actually destroy out of ignorance. They destroy the structures that make empire possible. And I wrote a column about this called The Empire Self-Destructs, with this amazing cartoon by Mr. Fish, by Dwayne, of Trump dressed as Captain America in a suicide vest. And that's what's happening. And the perfect example of that is USAID. So they go after USAID because they believe that the American government is pouring, I don't know what the budget is, but significant amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, into humanitarian aid. Well, that's not how AID works. AID, I know, I was overseas for 20 years, AID is an important part of the arm of imperial power. How does it work? Well, you only get aid if you adhere to the dictates of the empire. And if you don't, they have all sorts of programs. The National Institute for Democracy, I got that wrong, I think, but anyway, they set up programs that, like with Evo Morales in Bolivia, that fund opposition groups to overthrow power they consider too independent or hostile. And they use that money to go after, and those programs to go after Jeremy Corbyn, which Matt Kennard writes about in his book, The Racket. They also, it's a form of bribery. So for instance, Haiti, AID helped Haiti rebuild the airport in Port-au-Prince, but they demanded that Haiti, among other things, slash taxes and customs in these kind of industrial free zones that AID also helped build the infrastructure for, but also to vote against allowing Cuba into the Organization of American States. So it's an arm of power. Before AID, it used to actually be part of the CIA. It was covert, now it's just out in the open. And so watching them destroy AID, for me, was an example of how they don't understand the machinery of empire and how it works. They, of course, worship empire. You saw it with Trump and Vance and Zelensky. They love the power that empire gives them, but they actually don't know how to manage it. And I think that is part of the anxiety or even hysteria on the part of the deep state. They realize these people are not capable of managing the empire. And that is characteristic of late empire. Those who finally take power actually eviscerate the very mechanisms of empire, or the Leviathan that they worship. Pete Barron Marx talked about the need to avoid organizing for vulgar socialism, higher wages, better working conditions, and called for revolutionary organizing instead. What do you think is needed now? Well, here I'd have to turn to Lenin, who understood that if he wanted to mobilize the working class, higher wages and better working conditions were key. And there are all sorts of deviations between Lenin and Marx, and that's one of them. I mean, Lenin, by the way, I consider a fascinating figure, but absolutely amoral. And of course, he destroyed the Soviets, which was that one moment from roughly 1917 to 1918 when workers controlled their own workplaces under the banner of all power to the Soviets, but all power to the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party. So I think that appealing to the material interests of the working class is absolutely key, as Lenin understood, and very few people organize for...
All right, that highlight layer ate up a lot of time.
The idealism
but it's
no doubt.
needed to be precisely placed and a little bit subtle because I want the bright whites to be very dramatically contrasted against the darks, sort of a tenebrism or a chiaroscuro sort of effect. So I'm going to put it on take 2 and go into the other colors, or at least the next color down in tone. I might end up doing a few sessions. I think we've got our upload speed back. So stay tuned. Take 2 coming up. That's Chris Hedges Q&A in the background. I posted it to my Substack and I think to Terrence McKenna, New Mexico group. If anybody wants to check that out. All right, take 2.
Companies we have to focus on because they employ such a large amount of workforce, and because shutting them down in a strike would have significant economic effects. But these have Walmart has strike-breaking teams, so does Amazon. It's not going to be a very easy battle. The media is not on their side, so there's not a kind of public consciousness. Of course, the media is corporate owned. I mean, Bezos owns the Washington Post and just denuded the opinion page. Wasn't very good, but still denuded it. This is Kai Bain. Was this movement to totalitarianism inevitable even without Trump? Yes. And that was certainly the theme of my books for the last 15 or 20 years. Death and Liberal Class, Empire of Illusion, Wages of Rebellion, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, that I wrote with Joe Sacco, American Fascists, The Christian Army, the War in America, America, Farewell to Illusion, all warning that we were moving inevitably towards a totalitarian system because of the pronounced social inequality and the consequences of that. And that's something that has been understood by political theorists going all the way back to Aristotle, that you can't sustain an open society democracy when you have unprecedented wealth that creates unprecedented poverty. Fellow traveler, you're a huge inspiration to me and I love your books, thank you. I'm a U.S. civil servant, I'm constantly plagued with indecision and anxiety. How do you stay so measured during these times? I don't know how measured I've been. I mean, the genocide in Gaza has been pretty awful for me to ingest because I spent so much time in Gaza, and I think also because I was in Sarajevo in the war, so I know what it feels like to be shelled with hundreds of shells a day, although Gaza's worse. Probably coming out of war zones, coming out of disintegrating societies, I suppose conditioned me in a way to face that kind of bleakness. I think I have a pretty good understanding, having been in war, of the dark side of human nature. So I'm not surprised. I mean, I don't have many expectations that go unfulfilled because my expectations are very meager. So I don't know if that answers it. David Reek, communities form parallel governments as was done by the Catalonians during the Spanish Civil War. Would community co-ops undermine the oligarchy? Yes, the more parallel institutions that we can create, the more independence we have. And that includes food, by the way. So yes, although let's be clear, the POUM or the anarchists were crushed by the communist government, at that point backed by Stalin, and that's all detailed in George Orwell's book, Homage to Catalonia. That's a good question. This is Pacheco Ron. Were Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan skillfully managing the empire? No. Ukraine would be an example. They were cheerleaders for the disastrous military adventurism, 20 years of it in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, so no, they weren't. They were contributing to the combustion or collapse of empire. I mean, one of the things about Trump is that there's, that kind of inadvertently, there's an honesty there. So Blinken and Sullivan and Brett McGurk, all these figures, they knew full well that Israel had turned Gaza into a moonscape. I mean, Israel has dropped more than twice the tonnage of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on Gaza. and Gaza's only 20 miles long and 5 miles wide. And they knew full well that the intent was the depopulation or ethnic cleansing of Gaza. They just didn't say it. Trump is putting out videos of, Gaza is the Riviera of the Middle East. So, there's more honesty, I suppose. Remember Blinken on his first trip to the Middle East walked around with quotas. He went to Sisi in Egypt and Abdullah in Jordan and said, okay, we want you to take, I think with Sisi it was 1.1 million Palestinians and 700,000 in Iraq, I don't remember. So he was just a bag carrier for Netanyahu. So it's not just Trump and Marco Rubio and Vance who are imploding the empire. That's been a long time coming. Reverend Dr. Abu Haram. Chris, was I right in feeling a little cynical about the surprise revolutionary telethon that happened in Seattle after you recently spoke? I got up and left. I suppose you're referring to their effort to raise money. That's a tactic. I don't love it myself, but I had no part of it. In fact, I paid my own way out there. I didn't pay for it, so I already handed them probably the largest sum singly that they gathered at that event. This is Ziki. Chris, the World Economic Forum recently said that the public has lost trust in elites, and that the elites needed to rebrand to regain their trust. Do you think it's possible that Musk and company actually do understand how CIA fronts like USAID work, but instead recognize that the Trump administration needs to act like their anti-establishment in order to maintain the trust of their populist-leaning base in order to usher in more corporatization? I don't think these people do understand how empire works. That's their, they understand how to make money and how to game the system to make money. And let's be clear, Musk makes a lot of his money off of federal contracts. But no, I don't think they have a sense of how the empire functions, and I think that's why there's this deep animus within the deep state, which is created to run and maintain empire towards the Trump administration. Walkman, what advice do you have for people who want to pursue journalism? Seems to be a lot of chaos in the industry these days. Do you recommend journalism school? Also, any great novels you suggest leftists to read? Well, I mean, journalism is a dying profession, like the ministry. I mean, I guess I chose both. It's the model, the old model by which journalism existed doesn't function, it's broken. And what was that model? It was connecting, the news organization was the intermediary that connected sellers with buyers. They don't need that intermediary. They have all of our profiles and can target us directly. So how do you, I mean, Barbara Ehrenreich used to say journalists just have to begin to accept the fact that they're going to be poor. But it costs money to do reporting, that's the problem. In addition to having to pay the rent, I did some work for a while as an investigative reporter for the New York Times. I actually covered Al-Qaeda out of Paris, and it was extremely expensive. I didn't pay for it, obviously, the New York Times did. So yeah, I worry about the collapse of journalism, and I don't think we've yet found a model. The alternative press has always been a very important part of American journalism, and that it's kept the American legacy press honest. I remember Sidney Schanberg, who, if you've ever seen the movie Killing Fields, it was about him and Death Prod. He was a friend of mine. He said, well, Sidney once said to me, we may not have made things better, but maybe we stopped things from getting worse. That's probably a good description of the legacy press. But yes, I don't have a quick answer for that, because I don't think public funding, I mean, look at NPR, it's awful. And I used to work for NPR when it wasn't awful, many years ago. I don't know. And I mean, the internet and digital platforms like this one are good, but there is a lot of reporting on it. And I worry about whole sections of the country going dark, courts not being covered, police, and of course, local media has atrophied or died. And once that spotlight is taken away, however imperfect the coverage was, then corruption becomes an epidemic. So, yeah, I'm very, very worried about it. Sunil Kapoor, do you think Trump should be given some credit for his perspective on Ukraine, as he seems to be critical of NATO military expansionism, military-industrial complex, contrasted with the usual White House position on such matters? Yes, I'm in agreement. I didn't like the beating up on Zelensky in the White House. I thought that was really inappropriate. But I also have, from the inception, opposed the proxy war in Ukraine. It was a very cynical war. It was one that American military planners knew Ukraine could never win, but it wasn't designed for Ukraine to win. It was designed to degrade the Russian military and isolate Putin in Europe. And in that they succeeded, and the cost for the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian people was devastating. So it was always a very cynical process, as all proxy wars are. I covered many proxy wars. So yeah, I think that, but I think that the motivation towards ending the war in Ukraine, and it doesn't really matter what the motivation is, ending the war is a good thing, but I think the motivation is because the Trump administration admires the Russian autocracy under Putin, would like to emulate it, and build an alliance with a fellow autocrat the same way they do with Orban or anywhere else. I mean, this is the club. Netanyahu would be another one. But yeah, I have long opposed the perpetuation of the war in Ukraine. Sean Boyd, the U.S. empire is really about money primarily, and seems intent to simply wipe out as many of the 99% as needed. I don't see mass movements stopping the 1% U.S. class, but only bricks making the dollar nearly worthless. If true, what happens to the 99% in the world? I think we have the power if we regain that kind of militancy and recognize that the two-party system is broken, and that but I was in London a while ago, raising money for my friend Roger Hallam, who founded Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil. They shut down the M25 motorway around London, and even though Roger was all he did was in the planning stages. He wasn't even actually on the M25, but they put him in prison for 5 years. I visited him. I just have an email from him, actually, which my students in prison can't send emails, but I guess in the UK you can.
Happy accident.
So it shows how frightened the elites are. I mean, if we have the capacity to obstruct and shut down the system, to shut down the mechanisms by which they make money. If we want to use it, they will be very, very unforgiving. So, I mean, you're right about the dollar. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to speculate on that, but many people that know more than I do talk about the eventual collapse of the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and that will be catastrophic. Economically, we know what happened when the pound sterling was dropped as the world's reserve currency in the UK. The British economy went into a death spiral, and we would as well. People wouldn't buy our treasury bonds, so the empire would be forced to contract. Some people like Alfred McCoy, a great historian, are talking, I think, 2030 or giving it a date. I think that's always dangerous. But yeah, we're moving towards that, and that would be the death blow of the American empire. And it's certainly something countries like China, Russia, Iran are working very hard to achieve. Shire, would there be anything that you would update from your book, America, the Farewell Tour? No, because that was a book so it came out of the sociologist Emil Durkheim. And Durkheim wrote a book in, I think it was 1898, called Suicide, a fascinating book, in which he asked the question, what is it that drives individuals or groups to commit suicide? And that's where you get the term enemy. And he argues that it's those people, the social bonds that knit them to the society, and work is a fundamental aspect of the social bonds. Once you're severed from those society, it engenders pathologies that are self-destructive, including suicide. So in America the Farewell Tour, I'd already argued in other books about the consequences of unfettered, unregulated capitalism, social inequality, deindustrialization, all that stuff. And so there I focused on the pathologies that, what they call diseases of despair. So it was gambling, sexual sadism, suicide, and hate groups, or right when I was with the 3%ers, because Durkheim writes that those who seek the annihilation of others are driven by feelings or longings for self-annihilation. I was actually with them, had kind of echoes of, I don't know, a Hitler Youth encampment or something. I was actually with them in the woods outside of Binghamton, New York, and they had a giant bonfire. And of course there were guns all over the place. And I just was praying that nobody would Google me. And then from the other side of the bonfire, all these guys started pointing at me. So, I didn't run to the car, but I got out of there as fast as I could. I think that book was an attempt to look at these self-destructive pathologies that are eating away at the American, eating away at American society, including on gambling. It was written out of Trump's casino long before Trump announced. Kayara, Irish media started advocating for Ireland to drop its neutrality stance that we've had since the founding of the Irish state. What is NATO's plan for Ireland? Thank you for your brilliant work. Thank you. Well, that would be horrible. I mean, NATO should have been disbanded after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the idea that NATO is a defensive organization is ridiculous. Ask any Iraqi or Afghan if NATO is a defensive organization, or ask all of the peoples in Eastern and Central Europe who have watched NATO creep directly up to the Russian border and the kind of antagonisms that it has created. So NATO, once the Soviet Union collapsed, should have been demolished. It should have been folded. It should have. And I don't buy the thing that Russia wants to invade Europe. There were long, many statements coming out of Moscow, pleading with NATO not to keep expanding up to the border of Russia, and warning that there were consequences, all of which were ignored. There were promises made. For instance, promise not to deploy missiles in Eastern and Central Europe, and then of course he violated that promise. I mean, we would have not have reacted any differently if they'd been doing the same.
All right, well, that gets 2 color layers in.
Alex,
I was going for 4, but it's a little more intricate and time-consuming than anticipated for the small squiggle highlight layer. Since they're only going to let me put an hour up on Instagram, oh fuck it, I might just cut it and just put 3 photos on Instagram and to hell with them. Yeah, I think so. I'm going to swap my battery, put this memory card full's worth of process on the computer, and I'll be back with you for take 3 and possibly take 4 in a moment. Thanks. Alright, we're back. Take 3. Here we go.
In 3 days. It's going to be a very hard thing in doing business like this. Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? The Real Housewives of the White House. And then, afterwards, it's a press conference, and a reporter asked Trump, said, do you still believe that Zelensky is the dictator? And Trump said, did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Also, those tariffs. Who ordered those tariffs? I mean, the problem we have is the man who's running this country, is hell-bent on sowing chaos, and Trump is doing nothing to stop him. Elon, come back. Come back to normal, Elon. What the fuck happened? Really, Elon sent out an email to every single federal worker this week that said, name 5 things you've done this week, or you are fired. And a lot of people took this as a direct threat to Congress. I mean, is there bloat in the government? Yes, I've said it here many times. Yes, and we should get rid of it, and we've already tried. But, I mean, air traffic controllers, they're getting rid of, and first responders, and disease experts, and nuclear scientists. The Parks Department this week got rid of 1,000 people. Smokey the Bear is now working at Starbucks. Oh my God. I don't want to say federal workers are on edge, but today I saw my dog growling at the mailman. And the mailman bit him. I mean, I think what bugs people more than the fact that this isn't working is just the glee that they've taken it. I mean, Musk is always up there now with a chainsaw. He was at CPAC with a chainsaw. Ha 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 ha, a chainsaw. And Bobby Kennedy saw it and said, oh good, whale for dinner. But you know what? This is not going to come out well for them. There's already a lot of blowback. They are realizing that, yes, you elected the bull in the China shop, and we're the China. This is even going on with Republicans. There was a town hall, and the Republicans were screaming at each other. And so one of them finally stood up and said, please, people, we're all in the same cult. With everything that happened this week, but one more. Trump says now we're making, for the first time in America, an official language. It will be English. That will be the official language. Wow. First he comes for the non-binary. Now he's coming for the bilingual. Not a great week for Amelia Perez. Got a great show. We have Ron Emanuel and Fareed Zakaria. Oh, that's going to be great. But first up, she is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, now a candidate to be its next Prime Minister, the Honourable Chrystia Freeland. Good to see you. All right. You look like you are in full campaign mode there.
I am!
I know.
Is there any Canadians here?
Oh, I know there are. They're not all Canadian. Well, you are going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, and we're very excited. You were on our show many times in the past. When what were you, the finance? You were the finance minister just until recently, right?
That's right.
When you were on our show, what was your title?
I was the U.S. managing editor of the Financial Times.
The Financial Times. Well, you're moving up in the world, and now you're going to be the governor of our 51st state. Well,
and I want to be really clear, Bill, because
yes.
Canadians, we started off being sad because Americans, you're our friends, you're our neighbors, and it was just a shock for Canadians. But then Canadians got really angry because it's the President of the United States is saying repeatedly that he wants to use economic coercion to force us to become the 51st state.
I mean, do you take it seriously, or do you think it's just trolling?
No, I take it seriously, and Canadians do too. I am in full campaign mode, and so a couple of weeks ago, I was in a small city called Saskatoon, and a little 4-year-old girl came up to me with her mother. Her name was Ari, and she said to me in the serious way a little 4-year-old can you stop Trump from invading Canada? So right now, we are a country where 4-year-old children are saying, how do we stop this guy from invading the country?
Okay, so I have a question for you. Can you stop Trump from invading Canada?
thought you and 4-year-old girls from Saskatoon had that much in common, Bill, but I'll tell you what, yes,
Well,
I can. And not because of me, but because of Canadians. You know, Canadians. We're not really people who, you know, wear our flag on our lapel. But right now, there is this wave of patriotism across Canada. Hockey fans are just like singing "O Canada." Restaurants are pulling U.S. wine from their menu. Snowbirds, it's a cold winter, but snowbirds are not flying south.
I'm wearing a Tim Horton cap these days. I'm Team Drake. How about that? But, I mean, the truth is, this has helped your campaign. I mean, you were the Liberal. You're about to have the primary, basically, is how we would describe it. If you get that, because Trudeau's out, he's already quit, you were in his cabinet, you would become then the Liberal leader, and then in the election, if you won, then the Liberals were way behind in the polls until Trump did this. He kind of saved your ass. Is that not true?
I think that the election now, the ballot question in the Liberal leadership race and in the general election is who can stand up for Canada and who can fight for Canada. And that's what the pitch I'm making, Bill, is I'm saying to Canadians, I can fight for you and I can win.
Right, but as soon as the conservative here in America said he was going to invade Canada, suddenly the conservatives in Canada didn't look too good. I mean, the guy you will be running against, Pierre, how do we say his name? Pierre?
Well, I call him Maple Syrup Mega. Or,
Of course, that doesn't help with my pronunciation. And also, you know what? This is sad to me that everybody becomes more like America in our worst kind of ways. I remember seeing an ad not that long ago when I was playing up in Canada. It was campaign season. It was almost comically polite. Whoever Trudeau was running against. I mean, it was ridiculous. They certainly weren't calling each other names. But I hear this guy, Pierre... Polyev. I had it with the poutine. It's terrific.
We're actually talking about bilingualism.
Okay.
That's actually our thing.
I
We are
know.
bilingual.
Right.
Yeah.
But who is this guy? I never heard of him. I mean, I should maybe, but I try to follow a little bit of kind of, who is he? And he sounds very Trumpy. I mean, this is sad to me, that people in Canada are losing their polite.
Well, I think it's sad for us too, and he is pretty Trumpy, and I think he built a campaign on trying to imitate Trump. But now that Canadians see President Trump wanting to turn us into the 51st state, it's not going so well. And look, Canadians are very smart. And Canadians understand that right now what we need the most is someone who can stand up for our country.
So Justin Trudeau, who's on his way out, used to be very popular, and he still has his fans, 3. And they may be asking, why did you turn on him? Because, you know, you were part of his government. What was it? And also, what would you do differently? And if you watch the election here, don't ever say, nothing comes to mind. That's the bad answer to that one. What would you do differently?
Well, you know, with the Prime Minister, I think every politician has their sell-by date, and that's part of what happened. But I think the other thing that happened is my party, we're actually called the Liberal Party, and I am an old school Liberal. And Liberals in Canada win when we are focused on people and on what they need in their lives. And we lose when people think that we're focused on virtue signaling and identity politics.
So the same thing that sunk the party here in America when they went too far left. And that's the impression I got from Justin Trudeau. Why did he go and become one of those elitist type of scolds who looked like he was just overbearing, that sort of left-wing overbearingness? I saw recently, I think it was last week, Ottawa, I see, is trying to pass a law limiting the amount of time you can idle your car. Now, I've been in Canada in the winter. It's pretty fucking cold.
That's why we used to have snowbirds before we decided we didn't want to spend our money in the United States.
But I don't think this, I mean, the reasoning is it's gonna put a dent in global warming. I don't think it is. That you can only idle your car for a minute, I think remotely in 3 minutes if you're in it, before you can get going to warm it up. This just pisses people off, and it looks like, as in America, they still haven't gotten the memo that this shit don't work. So you're against that kind of stuff, right?
I have got the menu. I have received the memo, to be a polite Canadian. I have received the memo, sir.
Yes.
And, you know, politicians win when they listen to people sincerely and hear what people are saying to them about their lives. And politicians lose when we think we are smarter than the people we work for. And then we think our job is to lecture people. That's not how democracy works.
People don't like bossy, and they don't like snobs.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's all around.
Although people, right now in Canada, people do like strong. And people do want a leader who is strong, a leader who can unite the country, and a leader who can figure out a smart way to talk to everyone here, all our American friends and neighbors, and say, let's not have a dumb tariff war. Let's get back to...
As finance minister, aren't you the one who negotiated the treaty in 2020 that we have now with Trump?
Yes, he said it was the best trade deal ever.
Ever.
I think it's called the USMCA, and I think this could be one of the only things that both Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi support. It's a really good deal, and the relationship between Canada is balanced. It is mutually beneficial. I think you guys are really lucky to have us as your neighbor.
I agree. It's not my fault that I can't be here. Mr. Green, the next Prime Minister of Canada. All right, thank you very much. Let's bring up Travis. Okay, he is the host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria's GPS, a columnist for Washington Post and the best-selling author of Age of Revolution. Fareed Zakaria, and he's a former mayor of Chicago and former U.S. ambassador to Japan under President Obama. Rahm Emanuel is right here.
And just for a little narration, I guess the third color into the gradient of the highlight side will be the first color in the gradient in the shadow side. So that's how I'm balancing that.
You don't have the cards right now. You're gambling in World War III. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I thought that was Joe Pesci for a second. Fucking Trump.
You don't have the cards. Then you tell us, I don't want a ceasefire. I don't want a ceasefire.
Great day to be an American. And then my first thought is, he's having this big property with a guy who speaks English as a second language. I mean, so we're all agreed this is deplorable. You know, I'm trying to not use the word deplorable as much as I can. But when it's deplorable, it's deplorable. And anyone likes it, I mean, that's a deplorable point of view. But here's my question to you guys. I always said Trump is a coalition winner like every politician is. He's got a third of the country that loves this and will love anything he does. He got elected with that other part that's not the half that's liberal and democratic, but thinks that he was in some way less crazy than they are. Does something like this change that? Does this move the needle on the people who are that part of the coalition he needs to stay popular?
Look, I hope it does, because I think what we're seeing, it's you know, it's funny but it's really tragic, because first of all, to see the President of the United States and the Vice President bully, berate, demean, you know, cajole somebody who, you know, who depends on you know, the United States for its survival. But more than that, you know, over the last 100 years, the United States, whether it's supported Britain at the right moment, whether it supported, you know, the Allies in World War I, it was always clear, morally, politically, whose side we were on. We were on the side of the victim of aggression. We were on the side of the democracies. We were against the dictators. We were against the aggressors. And to see this bizarre moral reversion, you know, I mean, it was absolutely clear that listening to Trump, he's much more comfortable and sympathetic with Vladimir Putin. And he doesn't like Zelensky.
So, A, to the core part of your question, this will not work with the American people. First of all, the president's underwater, and it's only going to drive. They have and I want to pick up on what Fareed said, look, for a long time, our foreign policy has been basically internationalist versus isolationist. That's kind of been the structure. Now we have a foreign policy of either principles or predatory. And I don't think the American people who think of themselves are going to want to see themselves as we want those minerals for this price. We're going to take Greenland for this. We're going to take Panama. That is not where the American people have a self-image, and especially not the way it's being done and conducted this way. And second of all, there's a common thread here. There are 3 times I've seen Donald Trump, as I've never seen that before. I've been in the Oval Office in and out for 8 years. I've been in obviously other situations with congressional leaders, foreign leaders. And this moment today, well, I've never seen an Oval Office like this. This looks like the Emanuel family at Thanksgiving. Number 2 was when Nancy Pelosi in the cabinet room stood up and said all roads would lead Putin to Russia. And then third, in Helsinki, when he was standing there with Putin at a press conference, and he took Putin's side against the American national security apparatus and the intelligence community. What is the common thread through all 3 of these very, very low, very bizarre moments? Donald Trump defending Putin. And that is anything. And I think this is now beyond this to I think a more serious and I think consequential when we look at just 5 weeks that feel like 5 years. I spent a lot of time in the Far East during President Biden's term with Japan. We worked very hard to keep South Korea, from going nuclear. And they agreed to it. You now have an election where the new chancellor of Germany is saying, we have to think of our own nuclear protection. We spent 75 years on non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, so there will not be many countries with nuclear weapons. We're about to enter the era of proliferation. 5 years from now, the nuclear...
You're saying because they don't think they can count on America.
They cannot count on the United States for their own protection. You know, South Korea is now leaving their security to Donald Trump and the United States. Germany and Europe are now leaving their security to the United States and NATO. And you're looking at Ukraine. The only reason Ukraine's invaded is because we convinced them in 1994 to give up the nuclear weapons. And I think, as to quote my grandfather, when Germany, with a neo-Nazi party is running number 2 gets nuclear weapons, the great political sage, my grandfather, Herman Smolovitz, okay, that is not a good thing. You know that translation I say, right?
I'm familiar with that movie. I think that it's beyond even the things that Ron is talking about. Well, every country now, every ally of ours is asking themselves, how do we become less dependent on the United States so we don't have this shakedown? I mean, you heard what Christopher Freeman was saying, the debate in Canada is now, we've made a big mistake being this economically dependent on the US. We've got to find ways to separate ourselves. The debate in Europe and Germany is exactly that. The debate in Asia is that. I was in Australia last year, and those guys were telling me, look, we want to be close to you, but we are taking on a very hostile position toward China because of you. They're our biggest trading partner. What happens if you kind of deal with Putin, with Xi and leave us hanging? So in a weird way, the whole world is asking themselves, if the United States can betray Ukraine, if it can turn on Canada, where do we stand?
Okay, so,
Can I describe one thing?
Yes, sir.
Weakness divides aggression. You were watching Ukraine, Europe, what's going on? China.
That's an old
Yes.
Republican line.
Yeah, well,
Not,
you're seeing it play
it's
out.
true.
You're seeing it play out
Yeah.
in the Indo-Pacific. China just put a whole military operation closest they've ever been to Sydney, Australia. They just did it to Vietnam because they see the United States now, and they're saying to the whole region, you go with us, or you go with this guy. And the whole region's they gotta make a self-interested calculation, and they're not gonna be dependent on the United States, and this will become a more
So
dangerous
what do we
world.
say to the people who are watching and saying, oh, well, you guys are saying the world's going to hell in a handcart. So what do we do about it? Now, last week I opened the show by saying, there's a pattern in American politics, and it's about overreaching. Whenever someone wins an election big time, and Trump kind of did, they overreach. And that seems to be what's going on. And I said, maybe the best thing the Democrats are going to do is just be as lame as they are, and that strategy's working perfectly.
No, well,
And James Carville this week kind of one-upped it. He said, what the Democrats, I'm just asking, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, he said, they need to just play dead. Because this administration, only 5 weeks old, is making itself so unpopular that the worst thing anybody else can do is just get in the way. They're digging a hole, let them dig. That's James Carville.
that must be the applause for the whole part. Right?
Well, that's James Carville. I'm just asking if you agree, or if not, what is the strategy?
One, I want to correct one piece of the premise. When you get 49%, which is a plurality, not a majority, it's not a mandate.
No, it's not a mandate.
Okay, so one, they over-interpret it just like George Bush did in 2004. And he said, I got a mandate, and he went to privatize Social Security, and he got smacked in 2006. They do not have a mandate.
Who gives a fuck? He won the election. He won all 7 swing states.
They are trying to believe something, and that's misinterpreting. Now, number one. Number two, let me say one thing.
Changes nothing.
James Carville, who's a dear friend, said 2 things in there that aren't the same. He said retreat, and he said rope-a-dope. And rope-a-dope, it's not a retreat. It was using your strengths against your opponent's weaknesses. And rope-a-dope, in the sense of what allowing Donald Trump to do what he is doing, and I think the biggest fights beyond what we just saw in the Oval Office, will be when he literally tries to cut people's health care to pay for tax cuts for the rich people, for Elon Musk, and the rest of the people he's hanging with. And that is where you're going to see the biggest fight, and I think there is where you begin. I don't agree with the idea, genetically I don't agree with the idea of retreating. It's just not in my DNA. But rope-a-dope and retreating, which he used in that piece, it's not the same strategy, and I would not retreat.
But I think there's something, I love James Carville, I think he's a super smart guy, but I think it's a somewhat old-fashioned view of how politics works. What Trump has understood better than really almost anybody is the attention economy. He knows how to dominate the narrative. He knows how to be there all the time, shaping it. He knows how to make you think that he's won when he's lost. So when you see things like this happen, Trump and his people are going to go out and say, this was a great victory. Zelensky humiliated us. We had to push back. You need to be controlling the narrative. And the Democrats, I think, too often fall into this view, well, it's obvious this was a humiliation. It was obvious that this was bad diplomacy. No, you have to shape that narrative. Look at Kamala Harris. She goes on one television show, 60 Minutes, and does this 12-minute interview, carefully choreographed. He goes on for 3 hours on Joe Rogan. He goes on for 25 hours on 6 other podcasts, and he is relentlessly pounding the narrative. Democrats need to understand that's the new attention economy. If you're not shaping it, you're being shaped by it.
Here's one. He knows the art of deal. He knows how to do a deal. Well, wait a second. In his first term, he did a deal with China. He tried to do a deal with North Korea. And he also talked about the USMC deal there and the Afghan deal. There's one constant in all of these. He put publicity ahead of principle. He is actually the worst negotiator. And we should be actively pointing out and saying, here's the other course we're going to take. You never leave that field for him. I would not do that because he has to be confronted. Now, I would be more selective. I would not go, as I've said before, I wouldn't go sit there in my first protest be in front of USAID's office. I would pick a place that matters to the American people. I'd go to a grocery store and show all the open shelves on eggs. The fact is, we have no eggs and inflation is way up on eggs, and he's now fired everybody that will keep
And
on
he said he was gonna have this great strategy to end the Ukrainian war, you know, we couldn't hear what it was. And then when he got into office, what was his strategy? Give up. Just give up. He just surrendered everything immediately. That's, I've never seen anyone negotiate.
Nobody negotiates. You haven't seen it because nobody negotiates like that.
Right. It's crazy. I mean, he could have asked for a few things before he just capitulated.
He said, I mean, well, I don't mean to cut. So you wanted to say something?
No, it's just,
So it's a rare moment of me giving your microphone away, so go ahead.
What's sad about this is you watch foreign leaders, and they've figured him out. So if you watch, Justin Trudeau, he said you begin by praising him lavishly, you say, oh, you did everything right, then you give him none of what he wanted, you announce some bullshit.
Alright, I may do some fine-tuning off that off camera, but that's it for this moment. I'm going to wrap this session up, splice the three together, and put this up as a progress video on Facebook, and just do photos on Instagram with a link to the YouTube set. So, thanks for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from Mushroom Mansion, Taos, Mexico, working on oil painting Conscientious Emergence. As you can see, got the first 3 layers of color working around the highlight areas. So, have a good day, Earth.